The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Ravenshire like tears that refused to fall. In the small stone cottage at the edge of the village, 22-year-old Mira Blackwood stood before a cracked mirror, trying to see what everyone else saw when they looked at her. Plain. That was the word they used. Always plain. Her brown hair hung limp around a face marked by exhaustion and worry. Her grey eyes, once bright with dreams, had grown dull from years of caring for her sick mother and managing their failing bakery. Her hands, rough from kneading dough and scrubbing floors, trembled as she touched her hollow cheeks. "Too plain for marriage," the village women whispered. 22 and still unwed. What man would want such a girl? The truth cut deeper than any blade. While other girls her age had married and started families, Mira had remained trapped in a life that grew smaller each day. Her mother's illness had drained their savings. The bakery barely earned enough for medicine, and now the debt collectors were coming. A sharp knock echoed through the cottage. Mira's heart jumped as she recognized the sound. Heavy boots. Official business. The kind that brought only bad news. She opened the door to find Thomas Aldridge, the tax collector, standing with 2 guards. His cold blue eyes showed no mercy as he looked past her into the modest home. "Miss Blackwood," his voice was as sharp as winter wind, "your family owes the Crown 50 gold pieces in back taxes. Payment is due today." 50 gold pieces. It might as well have been 50,000. Mira's stomach twisted into knots. "Please, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother is dying. I need more time. The bakery will earn more once harvest season. Time is a luxury you can no longer afford." Thomas stepped closer, his shadow falling across her face. "However, there is another option." Mira's breath caught. "What option?" "A merchant has offered to pay your debt in exchange for a wife. You would be married before sunset, and your mother would receive the medicine she needs." Hope and horror warred in Mira's chest. "What merchant?" Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Magnus Thornfield. He's older. Had an accident with his leg some years back. Walks with a cane now, but he has gold. And gold is what you need." Mira had heard whispers about Magnus Thornfield, a reclusive man who lived in the old manor on the hill. Some said he was cursed. Others claimed he had made his fortune through dark magic. All agreed on one thing. He was strange, damaged and avoided by decent people. "I need to think." "There is no time to think." Thomas pulled out a rolled parchment. "Sign this contract or we seize the cottage and everything in it. Your mother will die in the streets." From the bedroom came a weak cough that made Mira's heart clench. Her mother, Eleanor, lay wasting away from the lung sickness that had slowly stolen her strength. Without medicine, she had perhaps days left. With it, she might see another spring. The choice was no choice at all. Mira's hand shook as she took the quill. The ink seemed to burn as she signed her name, sealing her fate with 3 simple strokes. She was no longer Mira Blackwood. In a few hours, she would become the wife of a stranger, a man everyone pitied or feared. "Good girl." Thomas rolled up the contract with satisfaction. "Magnus will collect you at sunset. Pack light. Your old life ends today." The hours passed like a fever dream. Mira helped her mother take the medicine that Thomas had brought with the contract, the first payment of her new husband's gold. Eleanor's breathing eased for the first time in months, and a bit of color returned to her pale cheeks. "My dear child," Eleanor whispered, taking Mira's hands in her own. "You have sacrificed everything for me." "You are my mother," Mira replied, fighting back tears. "I would do anything for you. But to marry a stranger, Magnus Thornfield has been alone for so long. People say he is bitter, angry at the world for his misfortune. Mira had heard the stories. Magnus had once been a young, ambitious trader who traveled the world buying and selling exotic goods. Then came the accident. His horse had spooked during a thunderstorm, throwing him from his cart onto sharp rocks. His leg was crushed, leaving him with a permanent limp and constant pain. Some said the injury had twisted more than his body. It had twisted his soul. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the sound of approaching wheels echoed through the village. Mira pressed her face to the window and saw a simple wooden cart pulled by an old brown horse. The driver was a tall man in a worn black coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. Magnus Thornfield had come for his bride. Mira gathered her few belongings. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible and a small locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything she owned fit into a single cloth bag. Her entire life reduced to something she could carry with one hand. The knock came soft but firm. Mira opened the door and found herself looking up at the man who was now her husband. Magnus Thornfield was not what she had expected. Yes, he was older, perhaps 40 years to her 22. His dark hair was streaked with early silver, and lines of pain creased the corners of his green eyes. He leaned heavily on a carved wooden cane, favoring his left leg. But he was not the monster the village gossips had painted. His face, while marked by suffering, held a quiet dignity. His clothes, though simple, were clean and well made, and when he looked at her, she saw not cruelty or anger, but something that surprised her: sadness. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice deep and careful. "I am Magnus Thornfield. I have come to honor our agreement." Mira nodded, unable to find words. The reality of what was happening crashed over her like a cold wave. She was leaving everything she had ever known to go with this stranger. She would share his home, his table, his bed. The thought made her cheeks burn with embarrassment and fear. "Your belongings?" Magnus asked gently. Mira held up her small bag. "This is everything." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps pity. "I see. Well then, we should go." The journey to Thornfield Manor takes an hour, and the roads are not safe after dark. Mira kissed her mother goodbye, promising to visit as soon as she was able. Eleanor blessed her and whispered a prayer for happiness, though they both knew happiness was not part of this arrangement. This was about survival, nothing more. The cart ride was mostly silent. Magnus sat beside her on the driver's bench, managing the reins with practiced ease despite his injury. Occasionally he would glance at her, as if trying to solve a puzzle he did not understand. "Are you afraid?" he asked finally, as they climbed the winding road toward his manor. Mira considered lying, but something in his tone suggested he deserved honesty. "Yes." "Of me?" She looked at his profile in the dying light. The strong jaw, the patient way he handled the nervous horse, the careful consideration in his voice. "I don't know you well enough to be afraid of you. I'm afraid of everything else." Magnus nodded slowly. "That is fair. Fear of the unknown is natural. I will not lie to you, Miss Blackwood. Mira, I am not an easy man to live with. My injury has made me particular in my ways. I do not entertain guests or enjoy social gatherings. My world is small and quiet. Why did you want a wife?" The question escaped before Mira could stop it. Magnus was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Finally he said, "Loneliness is a slow poison. I thought perhaps companionship might be an antidote." The honesty in his words touched something in Mira's chest. This man, feared and avoided by the village, was simply lonely. Like her, he had been marked by others as unwanted. Perhaps they were more alike than she had imagined. Thornfield Manor appeared before them as the last light faded from the sky. It was not the dark, crumbling fortress Mira had pictured. Instead, it was a modest stone house surrounded by well-tended gardens. Light glowed warmly in the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. It looked like a home. "It's beautiful," Mira said softly. Magnus seemed surprised by her words. "You think so? Most people find it gloomy. Most people haven't been living in a cottage with a leaking roof and doors that don't close properly." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Well then, welcome to your new home, Mrs. Thornfield." Mrs. Thornfield. The name felt strange and foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit. But as Magnus helped her down from the cart, his touch gentle despite his obvious pain, Mira began to wonder if perhaps this arranged marriage might be less terrible than she had feared. The interior of the manor was as surprising as the exterior. The rooms were tastefully furnished with comfortable chairs, thick rugs and shelves lined with books. Paintings of distant lands decorated the walls, scenes of bustling markets, snow-capped mountains, and ships sailing into sunset skies. "Your travels?" Mira asked, drawn to a painting of a desert oasis. "From my merchant days," Magnus confirmed. "Before my accident, I spent years exploring the world, buying and selling rare goods. These paintings remind me of better times." Mira heard the pain in his voice and understood. These images were not just art, they were memories of the man he used to be before fate changed everything. Mrs. Henley, the manor's housekeeper, appeared to greet them. A round, cheerful woman in her 50s, she had been caring for Magnus since his accident. Her eyes were kind as she welcomed Mira and showed her to her room. "Master Magnus is a good man," she whispered as they climbed the stairs. "Don't let the village gossips poison your mind against him. He's been hurt enough by this world." Mira's room was larger than her entire cottage had been. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and fresh flowers sat on the windowsill. The bed was soft with clean linens, and a wash basin with warm water waited for her use. It was more luxury than she had ever known. That night, Mira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear Magnus moving about his room next door. The soft thump of his cane on the wooden floor marked his restless pacing. She wondered what kept him awake. Pain from his injury, regret over his hasty decision to marry a plain village girl, or something else entirely. The next morning, Mira woke to find breakfast waiting for her in the dining room. Magnus sat at the head of the table, reading from a thick ledger while he ate. He looked up as she entered, and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Good morning," he said formally. "I trust you slept well?" "Yes, thank you." Mira took a seat across from him, still not sure what was expected of her in this strange new life. "Mrs. Henley has prepared quite a feast for your first morning," Magnus observed, gesturing to the table laden with fresh bread, eggs, bacon, and preserved fruits. It was indeed a feast compared to the thin porridge and mouldy bread that had been her usual fare. Mira's stomach rumbled loudly, betraying her hunger. She blushed with embarrassment. "Please eat," Magnus said gently. "You're far too thin. Mrs. Henley will take it as a personal insult if you don't sample everything." As Mira ate, she became aware that Magnus was watching her with a strange expression. Not the lusty hunger she had feared from a man who had bought himself a wife, but something more like concern. "The village did not treat you well," he said suddenly. It wasn't a question, and Mira felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What do you mean? You eat like someone who has been hungry for a long time. You flinch when I move too quickly, and your clothes." He gestured to her faded, patched dress. "They are well mended, but ancient. You have been struggling. Mira set down her fork, her appetite disappearing. My mother's illness took everything we had. I did what I could, but it wasn't enough. And the villagers, did they help? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The villagers pitied us. Poor Eleanor Blackwood, once the beauty of Ravenshire, wasting away from lung sickness, and her strange daughter too plain to marry, spending her youth caring for an invalid. Magnus leaned forward, his green eyes intense. Strange? In what way? I read books instead of gossiping with the other girls. I preferred working in my garden to dancing at festivals. I asked too many questions and gave too many opinions. Mira met his gaze defiantly. I was not what a proper village girl should be. To her surprise, Magnus smiled. Good. Good? I have no use for a proper village girl. They bore me. He returned to his ledger, but she caught him glancing at her with something that might have been approval. The days that followed established a quiet routine. Magnus worked in his study, managing his business affairs and trading investments from afar. He received letters from merchants across the kingdom and sent replies with careful instructions. Despite his injury keeping him from traveling, his mind remained sharp for commerce. Mira explored the manor and its grounds. She discovered Magnus's library, filled with books on history, philosophy, mathematics, and trade. To her delight, he told her she was welcome to read anything she liked. "You enjoy books?" he asked one evening, finding her curled in a chair by the fireplace with a volume of poetry. "Very much. My father taught me to read before he died. He said knowledge was the one treasure no one could steal from you." Magnus settled into the chair across from her, wincing as he adjusted his injured leg. "Wise man, what are you reading?" Mira showed him the cover. "Sonnets by Lady Celia Worthington." "I've never read anything like them." "Ah, yes, Lady Celia. I met her once during my travels, a remarkable woman, brilliant, passionate, unafraid to speak her mind. Rather like you, I imagine." The comparison made Mira's heart flutter in a way she didn't understand. "You think I'm like her? You ask questions. You form your own opinions. You think for yourself." Magnus studied her face in the firelight. These are rare qualities, especially in someone so young. The village called them faults. The village is populated by small minds and smaller dreams. There was an edge to his voice that suggested old hurts. "I learned long ago that the opinion of fools is worth less than nothing." As the weeks passed, Mira began to see past Magnus's gruff exterior to the man beneath. Yes, he was often moody and sharp-tongued. His injury caused him constant pain, which made him irritable. He had little patience for inefficiency or stupidity. But she also saw his kindness. He sent money to her mother regularly, along with the finest medicines available. He noticed when Mira admired a particular flower in the garden and quietly arranged for more to be planted. He left interesting books where she would find them, knowing her tastes were expanding. Most tellingly, she saw his loneliness. In unguarded moments, she would catch him staring out the window with such profound sadness that it made her chest ache. He was a man who had lost his dreams and didn't know how to build new ones. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in brilliant colors, Mira found Magnus in his study staring at a painting of a distant marketplace. His expression was so lost that she couldn't help but approach. "You miss it," she said softly. "The traveling." Magnus didn't turn around. "Every day, I was meant to see the world, to experience everything it had to offer. Now I'm trapped in this body, in this house, watching life pass by through windows. But you're still trading, still connected to that world. Through letters and ledgers, it's not the same as walking through a spice market in Alexandria or watching the sun rise over the mountains of Tibet. He touched the painting with one finger. I bought this in Cairo from an artist who had never left Egypt, yet somehow captured the soul of wanderlust. Mira studied the painting more closely. It showed merchants and travelers from many lands gathering in a busy square. The detail was extraordinary, each face telling its own story. But what struck her most was the sense of connection. People from different worlds coming together through trade and shared humanity. "It's beautiful," she said. "But Magnus, you brought the world to this house. These paintings, your books, the stories you could tell, the world is still with you." He turned to look at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. "Is it? I've learnt more about distant places in these few weeks than in my entire life before. You've shown me cultures and customs I never knew existed. Through your eyes, through your memories." She gestured to the books and artifacts that filled his study. "This isn't a prison, it's a treasure house." Magnus was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "When did you become so wise, Mira Thornfield?" The sound of her married name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. She was no longer the plain village girl who had been traded like livestock. She was Mrs. Thornfield, wife to a man who saw wisdom in her words and value in her thoughts. "Perhaps wisdom comes from finally having someone who listens," she replied. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Magnus began sharing more of his stories with her, describing the places he had seen and the people he had met. Mira found herself fascinated not just by the exotic locations, but by Magnus himself, his curiosity about other cultures, his respect for different ways of life, his generous spirit toward those less fortunate. She also began to see him as a man rather than just a stranger. She had married. When he laughed at something she said, her heart jumped. When he winced from pain, she wanted to comfort him. When he looked at her with approval, she felt beautiful for the first time in her life. But their marriage remained in name only. Magnus had never demanded his husbandly rights, and Mira was grateful but also confused. Did he find her so unappealing that he had no desire for her, or was there another reason for his restraint? The answer came on a cold November night, when a fierce storm battered the manor. Rain lashed the windows and wind howled through the eaves. Mira was reading by her bedroom fire when she heard a cry from Magnus's room. She rushed to his door and knocked. "Magnus, are you all right?" "Go away," came his muffled reply, but she could hear pain in his voice. Mira tried the handle and found the door unlocked. She pushed it open to find Magnus sitting on the edge of his bed, his face pale with agony. His injured leg was stretched out before him, the muscles cramped and twisted. "The cold makes it worse," he said through gritted teeth. "The old injury, sometimes it feels like it's happening all over again." Without thinking, Mira knelt beside him. "Let me help." "No." Magnus tried to pull away. "You shouldn't see me like this. I'm not. I'm broken, Mira. Damaged goods." "You're my husband," she said firmly. "And you're in pain." She had learned something about healing from caring for her mother. Gently she began massaging the cramped muscles, working out the knots and easing the tension. Magnus resisted at first, embarrassed by his weakness, but gradually he relaxed under her touch. "Better?" she asked after several minutes. Magnus nodded, not trusting his voice. But when he looked at her, kneeling beside his bed with her hair loose around her shoulders and her grey eyes full of concern, something cracked open in his chest. "Why are you kind to me?" he whispered. "Because you deserve kindness. I bought you, like a piece of property." "What kind of man does that?" Mira considered her words carefully. "A lonely man who didn't know any other way to find companionship. a hurt man who had given up on being wanted for himself. And what kind of woman stays with such a man? She smiled, and in the firelight, Magnus thought she looked like an angel. A smart woman who recognizes that sometimes the best treasures come in unexpected packages. Magnus reached out and touched her face, tracing the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You're not plain," he said softly. "I don't know what fool convinced you that you were, but they were blind." Mira's breath caught. "Magnus, you have beautiful eyes, like storm clouds that promise rain after a drought. And when you smile, really smile, it lights up everything around you. I'm not beautiful like the village girls. The village girls are like pretty paintings, nice to look at, but with nothing beneath the surface. You," he cupped her face in both hands, "you are like a rare gemstone. The beauty is hidden until someone takes the time to truly see." The space between them seemed to shrink. Mira felt her heart pounding as Magnus leaned closer. His eyes searched hers, asking a question she wasn't sure how to answer. "Mira," he breathed. "May I?" Instead of answering with words, she closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, full of wonder. Magnus tasted like tea and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I never thought," Magnus began. "What?" "That I could want someone to want me back." Mira smiled and touched his lips with her fingertip. "I do want you, Magnus Thornfield, not your gold or your house or your name. You." That night, their marriage became real in every sense. Magnus was gentle and patient, treating Mira like precious china that might break if handled roughly. But she was stronger than he realized, and her passion surprised them both. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the warm darkness, Magnus traced patterns on Mira's bare shoulder. "I have a confession," he said quietly. "What's that?" "When Thomas Aldridge told me about your family's debt, I didn't just offer to pay it, I insisted on it." Mira propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I had seen you in the village before. Many times you were always hurrying somewhere, to the market, to the apothecary for your mother's medicine, to deliver bread from your bakery. You never noticed me, but I noticed you. Why didn't you speak to me?" Magnus laughed bitterly. "Look at me, Mira. I'm a crippled recluse with a reputation for being difficult. What could I possibly say to someone like you?" "Excuse me, miss, but would you like to come have tea with the local monster?" "So you arranged to buy me instead?" Mira's tone was teasing rather than accusatory. "I told myself I was helping you, saving you from debt and poverty. But the truth is, I wanted you for myself. I had been watching you for months, admiring your strength, your devotion to your mother, the way you held your head high despite what people whispered about you." Mira was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. "You loved me before you even knew me. I was fascinated by you. Love, that came after. When I saw how you looked at my books with hunger, how you asked thoughtful questions, how you saw beauty in things others overlooked." He pulled her closer. "When you called my house a treasure instead of a prison, and when did you know that you loved me?" Magnus considered. "The night you helped me with my leg, you could have been disgusted, frightened, repulsed. Instead, you knelt beside me and offered comfort. In that moment, I realized I had been given something I never expected. A partner, someone who would stand with me instead of looking down on me." "I was already falling in love with you by then," Mira admitted. "I just didn't recognize what it was. I had never been in love before. And now," she kissed him softly, "now I know that being plain was the best thing that ever happened to me. It meant no one else wanted me, so I was available when you came looking." "You're not Plain," Magnus insisted. "You never were. You were overlooked, undervalued, hidden like a gemstone in rough stone. But I saw you. I saw your worth." As winter settled over Thornfield Manor, Mira and Magnus grew closer each day. They read together by the fire, discussed philosophy and trade, planned improvements to the house and gardens. Magnus began teaching her about his business, impressed by her quick mind for numbers and strategy. "You have natural instincts for commerce," he told her one day as she reviewed a contract proposal. "You see the long-term implications others miss." "I had to learn to think ahead," Mira replied. "When you're poor, every decision has consequences. One wrong choice can mean the difference between eating and going hungry. Would you like to become more involved in the business? I could use a partner with your practical wisdom." Mira looked up from the papers, eyes shining. "You would trust me with that?" "I would trust you with everything." And he did. As the months passed, Mira became not just Magnus's wife, but his true partner. She helped him expand his trading network, connecting with merchants who appreciated her direct, honest approach. Together, they developed new strategies for investment and growth. But more importantly, they healed each other's wounds. Magnus regained his confidence and sense of purpose. Mira blossomed under his admiration and respect, becoming the intelligent, capable woman she had always been meant to be. One spring evening, as they sat in the garden Magnus had expanded for her enjoyment, Mira made an announcement that would change everything once again. "Magnus," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the book he was reading, noting the excited nervousness in her voice. "What is it?" "I'm with child." The book fell from Magnus's hands as his face transformed with wonder and joy. "Truly, Mrs. Henley confirmed it today. We're going to have a baby." Magnus pulled her into his arms, spinning her around despite his injured leg. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "I never dared hope," he whispered. "A family of my own." "You're happy?" "Happy? Mira, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. First your love, then your partnership, and now this." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child who will grow up knowing they are wanted and treasured." The baby was born on a crisp October morning, after a labor that left Mira exhausted but triumphant. Magnus paced the floors below until Mrs. Henley called him up to meet his son. Little James Thornfield had his mother's grey eyes and his father's dark hair. He was perfect and healthy, and Magnus wept openly when he first held his son. "Look at him," Magnus marveled. "He's so small, so perfect." "He has your hands," Mira observed from the bed. "Long fingers. He'll be a merchant like his father, or a scholar like his mother." "Did you know," Magnus said, settling beside her on the bed with their son still in his arms, "that you're the most educated woman in 3 counties? You've read more books than most university graduates." "Only because I married a man who encouraged learning instead of discouraging it." "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Magnus smiled down at her, the crippled merchant and his plain wife. "Don't you dare call me plain," Mira said with mock severity. "I am Mrs. Magnus Thornfield, respected businesswoman, devoted mother, and beloved wife. I am many things, but plain is not one of them." Magnus leaned down and kissed her thoroughly. "You're right. You are extraordinary, rare, precious beyond measure. You are my treasure, Mira Thornfield, more valuable than all the gold in the world." As their son grew, so did their happiness. James was a bright, curious child who inherited his parents' love of learning and their head for business. The family prospered, but more importantly, they thrived. The village eventually stopped whispering about the strange match between Magnus Thornfield and plain Mira Blackwood. Instead, they spoke with grudging respect about the couple who had built something beautiful from an arrangement that should have been merely practical. Magnus's leg never fully healed, and he never traveled the world again as he had in his youth. But he discovered something better than adventure in distant lands. He found home in the love of a woman who saw his worth when no one else would. And Mira, who had once believed herself too plain for love, learned that true beauty comes not from perfect features or fashionable clothes, but from being seen and valued by someone who matters. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched James play in the garden while his baby sister Emma toddled after him, Magnus took Mira's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Being traded to a crippled merchant for your family's debt?" Mira laughed, the sound like silver bells in the evening air. "Regret being rescued by the one man in the world who could see my true worth? Never. Even though I bought you like a piece of property. You didn't buy me, Magnus." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with love and wisdom. "You invested in me, and I have spent every day since proving you made the best bargain of your merchant career." Magnus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, still amazed after all these years that this incredible woman was his. "Indeed I did," he murmured against her ear. "Indeed I did." In the village, people still told the story of Magnus Thornfield and his wife, but it was no longer a tale of pity or strangeness. It had become something else entirely, a story of hidden treasures, unexpected love, and the magic that happens when two overlooked souls find each other in a world that had failed to see their worth. And if sometimes young women who felt plain or unwanted would look up at Thornfield Manor and dream of their own merchant who might see their true value, well, that was magic too. For in the end, the greatest treasures are often disguised as ordinary things, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize their worth. Magnus Thornfield had found his treasure in a girl the world called plain, and she had found hers in a man the world called broken. Together they proved that love has its own economy, where the heart's true currency is not gold, but the courage to see beauty where others see only flaws. The old saying was wrong. They learned. All that glitters is not gold. But sometimes the things that don't glitter at all are the most precious treasures of all. The end.